Can I first of all welcome everyone? Thank you, everyone who's coming up to join us today. I think this is perhaps the new norm where we can certainly reach out to our residents a lot more clearly and certainly a lot more of them. As a local resident who's lived here for 50 years, I know how important it is to feel safe. And certainly I think that's why we have Tri-Borough Commander Stephen Clayman with us. We've had more than our fair share of issues and criminal behaviour over the recent years. And I think it's, we've got to accept that, but we have to appreciate that certainly as local people have hit hard times, been burgled, had their car stolen. And of course, the people we turn to is the council and the police. And it's important that certainly we, the council and our police counterparts, and really come up for our residents. 2018, we went through a spate of burglaries, and I know we worked proactively with the police to crack down on the perpetrators, and for that we're ever thankful with the police force. And of course, the council then invested in CCTV and invested in AMPR cameras to try and make sure that people realise that Redbridge is not going to be a safe haven for anybody to come and do their criminal behaviour. Similarly, when prostitution was running amok in Ilford Lane, we launched a huge operation with the police, and certainly that has, delivered the results we as residents expect. And during the lockdown that we're certainly experienced and are certainly experiencing, we focused on fly tipping and antisocial behaviour, and really sort of went into our parks because that's where our residents felt that they could get away from the boredom and certainly the lockdown. But I also appreciate there's a lot more that we can do and we have to do. Although our council resources are certainly very, very limited, very restricted, but we are committed to working with you, our residents, to make sure that we can certainly deliver. Tonight, we have some pre-submitted questions and we'll answer them first. We'll take on those questions, and during the 15 minutes or so, submit any questions you may want to in the Teams chat feature. So you can type in your questions. I know Kaylee, who's looking after it tonight, will certainly make sure that those questions are read out. We have this limited amount of time. We may not be able to answer all your questions. If we miss it out, we will respond to your questions. Now, without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce you to Borough Commander Stephen Clayman, who tonight will join me in answering your questions. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone. This is a new way of doing things. I hope it works for you. Before we go into the questions, we've got a few themes just to talk to you about, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about a couple of key areas for us, which I think will hopefully demonstrate the sort of work we're doing in partnership with colleagues in Redbridge Council. So it's great to be here. One of the things I want to talk about is violence. Street violence particularly, it's a Met priority. The Commissioner, you may have heard, talks about violence a lot. Violence is important to us here across the BCU, and the BCU, don't forget, is 3 boroughs, but we've put a lot of effort into working with colleagues here in Redbridge to make sure you're kept safe. But we do a lot of work around gang activity, where there is gang activity, drug supply particularly. We jointly task with Redbridge partners to try and reduce and minimise some of the issues that are happening on the streets. And in fact, on the 16th of March, some of you may have read, we set up a multi-agency tasking team. And that team is there to look at specific issues, particularly in Ilford town centre, Ilford Lane, looking at prostitution, which I'll mention in a minute. The good news is, and this is, I should add, this is despite COVID, we saw a lot of reduction in crime during the COVID period, but actually we were seeing reductions before COVID actually hit the community. So robbery, overall crime and violence with injury and knife crime were falling and have continued to fall over the last few months, and that's really good news. We've been doing dedicated operations in Redbridge to tackle violence. We've got a new violence suppression unit, which some of you may have heard about. That's a dedicated team looking at particularly street-based violence, and those teams are out there all the time looking to see how much further we can reduce and make you safe. I mentioned prostitution. That was I know when I first arrived here 18 months ago, it was a very big issue in a certain part of the borough. I think many of you have seen a huge difference in street sex workers on the street. Are they still about? Yes, but we're tackling that, and we look at prostitution and tackle prostitution by treating the women as victims, which they are. A lot of these women have been trafficked into these roles and living what is a terrible existence. So we're there to try and help them, but also prosecute those who are using them to effectively make money for them. And again, the multi-agency team is very much part of that. And I should add, and we made this point fairly recently, that it's local people using these services. And we looked at the number of tickets, and we found that in a small geographical area, local people are using them. So the solution to some of this is found within the community too. A lot of work going on, and I appreciate we haven't got a lot of time. I'm going to hand back to Councillor Athwal just to pick up another couple of key themes, and then we can go into the questions.
Thank you, Stephen. And certainly what I want to talk about, a couple of issues here, domestic abuse. And I know this is a devastating, the impact of lockdown has meant that there's been a steady rise in the cases of domestic abuse. We identified that very early on as a potential consequence, and certainly maintained that as a priority from the start to finish. And we made sure that we worked hand in glove with the police. And there was, during lockdown, we certainly had a large operation which led to a high number of arrests. However, we know that we need to do a lot more. A lot of this still goes unreported. We need neighbours, we need friends, we need family to call it out for what it is. It is abuse, and no one should have to suffer this. And certainly this is something which we've reached out to our communities. We've set up a domestic abuse helpline. We've certainly set up a reach out service, which is open to both people experiencing domestic abuse, their families, and also to those who feel they're either abusing their family members or at risk of abusing others. And we want everybody to really be aware that this exists and is a problem. We want to make everyone, we want to assure everyone that there is support available for everyone to go forward. The reach out number, which can be widely got from the council's website, is 0800 145 6410. Operates Monday to Friday, 9 AM to 5 PM. Residents can also email reachout@redbridge.gov.uk. Of course, in an emergency, you've got to always call 999. I'm going to hand it back to Stephen Clayman.
Thank you. And I think we've got some questions that have been sent in. They're going to be read out.
Brilliant, thank you. So the first question is from Jenny. She's a resident who doesn't feel safe in Ilford Town Centre and would like to know how the police are tackling this.
So I'll just pick up a little bit of where I picked up before around the multi-agency team, some of the operations, just to demonstrate some of the work that's going on, which you may not always see. So if I go back to some of the work we've been doing around Ilford Town and Ilford Lane, we ran an event fairly recently in June where we had over 111, in fact, an exact number, stop and searches, a number of arrests for possession with intent to supply. We had additional fines for cannabis, community resolutions and fixed penalty notices. And what that also drives is some of the work we're doing around problem solving, because policing and enforcement is only part of the problem. We can't solve all these problems on our own. This is where we work very, very closely with council partners. Last year, a year ago, we ran a covert operation in around the train station. It was called Operation Linstock, and it's interesting because you wouldn't have seen that operation. It was covert, but after 6 months of work, we arrested and charged over 50 people with supplying drugs, and the sentencing for that is custodial sentences, very harsh, very strong sentences for a very serious crime. By reducing some of that possession with intent to supply and some of that supplying, which I know there might be another question on that, is actually makes a huge difference. But I should say that problem solving is absolutely key to trying to design out crime, make it safer. And I think there's a lot of perception here because if you're not feeling safe, I've just told you some of the figures and the reductions in crime. Redbridge, compared to other boroughs, is a relatively safe borough, but if it doesn't feel like that to you, that's a concern to me. So we need to be telling you more about some of the things that we're doing to try and make you safe.
Thank you. Another resident would like to know what is being done about pickpockets, especially those who are preying on the vulnerable.
Yeah, again, so pickpockets, let's be honest, pickpockets aren't one of our priorities that we'll focus on. That doesn't mean we won't deal with it when we come across it. But I think with this type of crime and pickpocketing, one of the things we must do is look at how we reduce it by making a member of the public, a local community member, less of a chance of becoming a victim. When we talk about problem solving, we talk about a vault model, which is a victim, offender, location and time. The principle being, if you remove one of those items, particularly the first three, the crime won't happen. So we want to remove victims. So that's by raising your awareness. It might be by targeting particular people we know are involved. We do have safer transport teams that work on the borough that do look at people who are looking at that activity on the train networks and bus networks, and also they will obviously spill out onto the street. So for me, this type of crime is very much trying to reduce yourselves. So being aware who's around you, being aware of distraction techniques that they may try bumping you. We want to make you aware of that, and that's us communicating that to you.
Thank you. Third question is from Jeremy. He would like to know, how do the police propose to tackle the open drug dealing and related antisocial behaviour that plague certain areas of the borough?
So thank you. So I think drug dealing is a big concern. We get a lot of calls about drug dealing. Now, what we have to do is be very measured and precise with the work that we do to tackle drug dealers. So we want to go and target drug dealers we know are causing harm. They're involved in criminal enterprises or gangs who are creating harm. A lot of the violence we see in knife crime is often to do with drug markets. It's a driver of violence for us. So the Operation Linstock I talked about was one example of a covert technique we use. We've just introduced a drugs desk that we run internally, which looks at the individuals we know are involved in supply, proactively targeting people, cars that we know are involved. The violence suppression unit I talked about is very much involved in that. We've seen our increase in arrests and charges for possession go up exponentially as we're trying to reduce what is a real driver for violence. So also, you are the eyes and ears. So I know a lot of the time you will feed that information to us. You may think we're ignoring it. We're not. We log it. Cars that you tell us about, we log. That informs our stop and search activity. And the other thing we're looking at, cannabis factories. There are hundreds of them in London. We have quite a few on the borough. They are a driver for violence. If you've got information that there's one operating, and they're often in terraced houses, we need to know and we will close them down. They are a driver. People break into them. We get called and we find a yield. So we're doing a lot of things because we understand what drives violence. But open drug dealing and drug dealing that drives that is very much in our focus at the moment.
Thank you. The fourth question is, will there be an increase in regular foot patrols in Redbridge?
Well, actually, so this is an interesting, I get asked a lot about visibility of police officers. And I guess when you see a police officer, you feel reassured. We do have a lot of visibility at times, but I don't think everyone sees it. Yes, we do have abstractions when we have to police central London protests. The UMEs that we hear about, these unlicensed music events that go on across London, they do draw our staff to other areas of London. I'll be honest, that is a problem for me. So the less they go on, the more I can keep the officers in my BCU on the boroughs that they need to be. But we have increased our patrols with advanced suppression unit I talked about. We've increased some covert patrols. So again, you wouldn't always see them. And fortunately, we've had quite a number of new officers join the 3 boroughs. Over the last 3 months, over 100 new officers, a lot of uplift into the BCU, which is brilliant. And those officers go through a program of learning called Street Duties, and we make sure that they have their 8 weeks of street duties in the town centres, because that's where they'll learn. That's where most of our issues and sort of volume crime will take place. So we are putting more and more officers into those areas. Can we do more? Yes, of course we can. And we also have special constabulary too. So there's a lot that we do, a lot more we can do, but you may not always see it, which I suspect is a problem.
Thank you. And the 5th question is, given the increasingly diminished resources of both the council and the police, and the increased reliance on the public to be the eyes and ears, how can the police make it easier for members of the public to share vital data, such as CCTV footage, in a speedy way?
So another good question, and I haven't got the final answer to this, and I'll explain why. There's 2 bits to this question. How do you share video material? I mean, a lot more houses now have Ring doorbells, have their own CCTV. Ring doorbells, really, really good footage at times. That's easily shared, as you know, via a web link, so you can email that straight to the officer in the case. That's easy. Where it comes to other video footage or photographs, we're just looking at the viability of using Box or some other, well, we use Box as a file share system. We're just having a look now centrally at what's being offered, because I absolutely agree we need to be able to respond and pick up footage. What I would say is, where we do need to get key evidence, and that's with a crime that's actually being actively investigated, we do have units that will go out and retrieve some of that evidence. But we can't do that with every crime, but we will on the crimes that are being actively investigated. But what I would say, and I do agree, we need to find the proper vehicle to download CCTV or other imagery. So we'll look into that. When we get the answer, we will let you all know. But the second point I want to say, the question uses the public eyes and ears. This raises another issue around how the community interact with us and give us the information, the awareness, the context of what's going on, particularly on your wards. Now, every ward has a ward team. They are your direct and first point of contact. Every ward has a ward panel. We have an independent advisory group, and we are really trying to reinvigorate, especially ward panels. Now, we had one of the wards yesterday had their first virtual ward panel using technology like this. Makes it a lot more accessible to everybody. So the more you get involved, the more you understand what's going on in your ward, the more you can interact directly with your ward officers, the better it is for us to react. So eyes and ears is very much not so much, it's a bit about video and digital technology, but it's also about us as residents feeding directly back to the officers what you're hearing, seeing and feeling.
Thank you. Imran would like to know, how is the force tackling modern day gang behaviour, especially those using tenancies for illicit operations? So
this is an interesting question. We do work closely with the council. So let's pick up directly the tenancy. We do go through the council. If we have an individual involved in criminality, and I'm sort of going wider than just gangs here, but it will apply. We use gangs, the term gangs, quite widely. I would also use the term criminal enterprises. It could be any activity which is causing concern to local residents. We have the ability, and we will share that information with our council partners, and then we will look at we will ask the council to look at the tenancy agreements, and the council will write, and we can tackle things in that way. That is one of the elements that we can use to try and tackle this behaviour. Gangs and dealing with gangs is an interesting, complicated process, because we know that gangs operate in areas, not all areas of Redbridge. We know that we have young people who are involved in gangs via county lines in other areas of the country, which is effectively modern slavery. That's happening too. We have addresses taken over, cocooned effectively by criminals, gang members. We actively get involved. Now, ward officers get regularly involved in tackling and getting rid of those people and leaving the tenants to have a life without that interference and fear. So gangs we tackle through a host of mechanisms on the BCU. So whether that's direct enforcement, whether that's working on diversionary schemes. So we offer, particularly gang members, lots of opportunities. And only recently, as we came out of the lockdown, not only did we have lots of micro patrols in the area, coming back to the earlier point about patrolling, we went to a number of individuals, young people involved in violence, and offered them a way out. And that's important that we follow up enforcement with an offer of help. And actually some of them do, not all of them do. And we work with charitable third sector organisations like Lifeline, Spark to Life, to try and offer an alternative lifestyle and way out. And that's really, really important. So we tackle gangs on a number of different levels, and we work with the Violence Reduction Unit for MOPAC, and we review all the tactics that we do. It's not just, I think the very famous saying is you can't arrest your way out of it. Very true. We look at a number of things, and we're having some real successes. But again, we won't know about it unless you tell us about it.
Thank you very much. Well, on to our last question. A resident believes that 101 waiting times seem to have increased. Is there anything that can be done to reduce the hold time?
Well, I confess I wouldn't have known the answer to this without speaking to colleagues in our Met Command and Control. So we asked them, and it's interesting the response that we got back, actually, because they often said there's a perception that 101 answering times are increasing, but they assure us they're not. And in this month alone, their operators have handled over 100,000 101 calls. And they said that 85% of those are answered in under 30 seconds. They do have peak times, Thursday to Saturday. They tend to be the longer waiting times, which I think we can probably understand, and that's demand. And call demand now has gone back to what they were before we had the lockdown, which means there's a high volume. And there'll be occasions where the 999 calls, they have to prioritise them, but they will answer the 101 calls. And it's worth noting that when we have events and UMEs and all these other things, that they all put an extra and additional demand on the 101 system. But actually, I think when you're hanging on waiting for a call, the tendency is it probably feels like an eternity, but it may not be, unless of course you're timing it. But the message back from the Met Command and Control, and they do look at this, I've been there, they have a board up on their room that tells you how many calls are coming in, how quickly they're being answered, literally going on constantly 24/7. So they are answering them. I think it's more of a perception they're not, but you can see the sort of demand the Met takes in terms of some of these 999 calls. During lockdown, we had an immense amount of calls relating to what was classed as antisocial behaviour, but actually they were COVID-related calls, such as there's lots of people in the park, not social distancing, and things like that. So there is a huge demand. It is actually very well managed, and I hope that actually the reality is the wait is not as long as you think.
Brilliant, thank you. If I now hand over to Councillor, and he can answer the questions that we had submitted last week from residents as well. Is that okay if I start with the first question, and that is, what is the council doing to help with increased visibility on our streets?
Thank you, for that question. I think the answer is there's a lot of things that the council is doing, certainly to increase the visibility. We've launched Street Watch, which is a community partnership led by members of the public who kindly volunteer their time, and they work in a very cohesive manner in their local neighbourhoods. What we're also starting to launch is the community speed watch, where speed guns will be given certainly to residents alongside a police officer to monitor speed on their local sort of roads and their local networks. Certainly as a Street Watch member, residents provide really high visibility reassurance in their own neighbourhoods, and patrolling their local streets and making sure that the visibility extends all the way from the council. But certainly one of the things that we've done in the council is that we've tripled the number of enforcement officers, and these are officers which work in tandem with the police and making sure that they can actually tackle things like street drinking, fly tipping, issue fines, PCNs, FPNs, and of course all this is on top of the normal council officers who are doing their jobs. And of course we've got our Red Bridge Action Days, affectionately known as RADs, where once a month the council officers, all of us, you know, whether it's councillors, whether it's trading standards, it's enforcement officers, amongst many other officers, where we literally go through a neighbourhood like an army, going through, checking, making sure everything's clean, checking people's licenses, making sure the shops are doing what they're saying they're doing. And all that is done consistently, and certainly we have the police with us as well. So there's a lot that we're doing, and of course there's a lot that we can do and we should be doing, and we are. Thank you.
Sorry, another resident would like to know, what are the police and council doing to support young people who are known to your early help service, and can people request more support from other agencies?
Thank you, Kaylee. Certainly working with the young people, we've opened up Young People's Hub, our PRU, our Pupils Referral Units. We've got Box Up Crime, which we work for. I'm very proud to work with them, and certainly they've moved their services online mentoring, Instagram, live boxing sessions. They're doing great work. Certainly they engage with the community, they engage with the local residents, especially the young ones. And we've got the Junior Fit team, which has been working throughout COVID-19 to provide the whole family support network to children at risk of criminal exploitation or the well-being issues. Certainly all these have been set up by the council, and they have been virtual, obviously, because we have been in lockdown, via FaceTime, instant messaging, home visits as well, for where we've been concerned. And of course, early help have rapidly adapted their parenting support program. Again, with the council, early help have worked with our partners to support young people known to our services, and referring young people to specialist services for young people who've witnessed domestic abuse. Free Your Mind in Phoenix from Bernardo's is one such service. We have been working closely with schools to support them throughout the lockdown, and of course throughout the lockdown, keeping them open, and of course how we're going to get back to schooling in September. And of course we made sure we identify the children who needed the IT equipment, which we got from the government. So lots been going on behind the scenes, and the early years team has really been working wonders, and as we all know, they're outstanding and noted by Ofsted to be outstanding as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah would like to know, what is the council doing to bridge the gap for young people aged 16 plus caught in the system?
Thank you, Kaylee. I think the youth offending service run, a lot of these services. They run the projects that teaches life skills and has supported hundreds of young children across Redbridge. The youth offending team and the targeted prevention service developed a local piece of land into a working allotment, so local children and young people who were supported by the service could develop new gardening life skills when completing their time. And certainly this outstanding project has been in place for more than 11 years now and has helped hundreds of children come through the system. The council works with the Lifeline projects. They offer mentoring via phone and video calls, positive activities like quizzes, games, online gaming, online tutorials, outreach. All this goes on. Of course, the unsung heroes, which is the people who really make this work. We owe so much to them, and I'm really glad that the question can be asked so that we can actually finally get through to some of these people who are so dedicated behind the scenes, but so important to keep the 16 plus on the right tracks. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one of our residents, Mr. Baker, is very concerned about increased crime, drug taking and antisocial behaviour in Bali Lane Park, especially in the public toilets. He says, as this facility is used by families, schools and commuters during the day, they don't want to lose it. So how can the council make it safer for everyone to use?
Thank you for that question. I think first and foremost, please report any antisocial behaviour to our enforcement teams via the council's website, and certainly allows us to track everything and then divert resources to where we're seeing the information needs are. And that is really sort of imperative. And then our uniformed enforcement team, because they do have the powers to issue fixed penalty notices. They have the power to issue a statutory notice, seizure of property, escalate the issue further and give out warning letters. What we need to do is make sure our officers are engaged, and the way we can engage our officers is making sure we keep reporting this. And sometimes residents do worry about these things and it doesn't get any further. But what I would always encourage, we need to build up that history, and by residents reporting in, certainly it's going to allow us to build up that history. If you do witness the crime, 101 is another number to ring. Of course, as Stephen has said, the wait times have gone down considerably, so that's good. And of course, our parks team are able to visit the toilet facilities and review the lighting, review the usage, look at ways the venue can be made safer for everyone. All these things can be done if these antisocial behaviour problems are reported. Of course, over the last sort of 3 months, we've had a huge increase in the number of people using our parks. And the increase in antisocial behaviour goes alongside this, sadly. And we've invested a huge amount into our parks, and certainly making sure our bins are emptied quicker, making sure our exercise machines are certainly up to speed. Only today I've been along to Valentine's Park, where we've opened a new facility where residents can literally go in and utilise. But most of all, you can help us by taking your litter home, reporting antisocial behaviour and fly tipping to the council online or through 101. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the residents, Mrs. Chowdhury, believes that prostitution is creeping back on Ilford Lane and would like to know what are the roles of the enforcement officers, how many powers do they have, and do they have a mobile contact number like the previous task team?
Thank you to Mrs. Chowdhury for a question. And certainly, I think, as Stephen touched upon earlier, the prostitution issue on Ilford Lane has been at the forefront of our minds for the last sort of couple of years. And the good work there is certainly not going to be lost. we've had lots of positive feedback over the last year or so on how we've had residents who feel safe again to walk down Ilford Lane at 8, 9 o'clock with their, a couple could walk home safely. Parents can happily allow their daughters to walk down Ilford Lane. That is really positive news. However, unfortunately, during the pandemic, our regular patrols decreased. And also the economic uncertainty caused by the virus led to some people becoming very desperate for money and turning to this sad trade. It's been very difficult. And of course, the police had to prioritize their numbers as well. There is now a joint task team assigned to Ilford Lane to tackle this issue once again. Our enforcement teams are back, the police are back, and certainly I want to reassure all our residents that we will be issuing FPNs to people who are certainly soliciting for sex workers on Ilford Lane. And of course, the prostitution information hotline is still operational and can be shared with the local community as a means to providing intelligence on the prostitution to the local team. The CCTV cameras, which we certainly use, we've got AMPR cameras on Ilford Lane, so we can track numbers as well. When I say we, of course, it has to go through to the police. And the council and police have certainly developed the fast track to closing brothels. And we share the intelligence with each other. We make sure all the agencies are up to speed. And certainly I know 3 have been closed very recently, and we will keep on vigilantly working with our residents to ensure Ilford Lane remains safe and does not return to what it was about 18 months prior to that. And I think that this is one of our main sort of leads on Ilford Lane, is to keep it there for our families and residents to enjoy, and we will carry on the hard work. Thank you, Mrs. Chowdhury, for your question.
Thank you. Another resident believes that Redbridge needs stricter deterrents to prevent antisocial behaviour, and would like to know what the council and the police are trying to do to implement these.
Thank you. I think even in these desperate times for money, we've made additional funding available to hire more enforcement officers. And I think closer working with the police has really meant that we can work, we can punch above our weight. But of course, there are unlicensed music events, UMEs, as Stephen Clayman put it earlier. We've had to close 4 of those unlicensed music events. And as you close these, they take resources. And we're extending the town centre PSPO and the public space protection order. This will include begging as well. As we come out of lockdown, there's been an increase in unlicensed events, outdoor raves across London. And some of those attract over 3,000 party goers. And of course, that means the levels of nuisance increase, the police involvement increases, and sometimes the police do get called to other places, other boroughs, because obviously that is the way we work. We're not a republic, we do not work in isolation. However, in Redbridge, we are sort of fast in developing a process where we use all eyes and ears to get reports of potential unlicensed music venues. To do this, it takes resources, and we will carry on certainly working together using the deterrent of uniformed police and uniformed enforcement officers to make sure we try and keep our borough safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last question is from a resident who would like to know who monitors the CCTV in the borough, and are they monitored during unsociable hours?
Thank you. Certainly what we've done is we've invested not just in the CCTV cameras, but also invested in the automatic number plate recognition cameras. As State-of-the-art CCTV is monitored 24 hours a day, including the ANPR cameras, which track number plates. But of course, the ANPR cameras, they're run through the police system, and it has to be through that way. And it's the police that actually adjudicate on those. But the council CCTV is monitored 24 hours a day. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Mr. Clayman, who can answer the questions that were submitted at the beginning of the event for our live Q&A panel, if that's okay. And the first question is, why is Loxford Ward still understaffed and has been for such a long time with no continuity of officers? And they believe they've had 4 police sergeants within 6 months. Mr. Clayman, sorry, are you on mute?
Just testing the system. I'm glad you picked. Those who couldn't understand what I was saying. I was saying that generally the police officer situation at the moment, we're not understaffed in those particular posts, although there might be one officer not about at the moment for a particular reason. In terms of sergeants, I would say that police officers do move about. We do try and retain the officers as long as we can, but there is always movement, and it is a frustration, I know, for many people. There is a new sergeant in there. They've been in that role for 2 or 3 months, I think, a little bit less. So it is a constant. We do have a sort of a churn of officers. We do try and keep them in there as long as possible, but sometimes the officers do move into new roles, progress, get promoted. It's just something we do have to manage, and I do appreciate that. Sometimes it doesn't work very well for those who live in the ward, but it is one of those things we just manage on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Another resident would like to know, or can they have an update regarding drug dealers and antisocial behaviour in Athwal Rec, and if this moves their likelihood move back to Loxford Park, how can you prevent this from happening?
So I haven't got an exact update. I can't give you a precise update on that at the moment. What I would say is, well, I think the ward team need to be having a conversation with you on that, and we can get that. If we've got the details, we can get that sorted. We will always, as I said to you before, antisocial behaviour, drug dealing is a perennial problem we're always tackling. And what we'll do is we will target an area that might move it somewhere else. And we're always playing a little bit of a cat and mouse game sometimes with some of this activity. And as I said to you before, we have to sometimes put our efforts where we know we're going to make the biggest impact. So we'll get to it eventually. Sometimes it just takes us time. But again, don't stop telling us what's happening, and we'll continue to put the focus where we need to.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question is, at the start of lockdown, there was a strong presence of police on the streets. However, since then, it seems to have dwindled. Why is this, and why can it not continue?
Interesting question. So when COVID started and lockdown really came in, you can imagine that everyone was really concerned that around our numbers and the impact on policing. Actually, ironically, the impact on policing was, if you can imagine that people are not going away on holiday, so not taking their leave, we were cancelling central training. So effectively, we had more officers than we would ordinarily have on the street, which was great. And what it demonstrates when you've got a lot of officers is that our proactivity increased. And I think I've said before in local interviews that actually we didn't take our foot off the gas at all in terms of our way we're tackling crime. We put more energy in. Our stop and search activity went up, our arrest rate went up, our crime reduction went down. So actually what you saw was an enhanced level of policing. And then of course, as soon as our crime levels are getting back to, they're not quite where they were, thank goodness, but the call demand started going up. and then of course some of the people are now going away on leave. That's naturally going to have an effect on those numbers. So we're back to sort of the numbers we had before. We are always servicing 999 calls every single day. We've got teams present across all the areas of the BCU, but of course we have had we can see the impact now that lockdown is released to a certain degree, and we're back to sort of previous levels. That's why you probably saw such a marked difference.
Thank you. Another question is relating to speeding. What resident is saying that she keeps reporting speeding off roads near Albert Road, and that some of these, some of them are going 50, 60, even 70 miles an hour. However, she doesn't think that she's getting any response. Is there anything that we can do to help her on this?
So when it comes to traffic matters like that, that's not dealt with by local officers, but we'll refer the matter to roads policing. That's a separate entity in the Met. They cover London, but they obviously have a quadrant that covers east of London. We'll pass that to them in the first instance to see if they can assign some asset. I can't guarantee they will. We are also looking at actually community participation in doing some road safety and speeding sort of awareness, working with us. That's not quite here yet, but we are looking at that. So we will certainly in the interim pass those details through to our Roads and Transport Command.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over back to the leader and to give him an opportunity to answer some of the questions that were forwarded at the beginning of the event. The first one is from a gentleman called Stephen, and he would like to know, why are we seeing so much unlawful pavement parking along Cranbrook Road at the Ilford end? It's damaging the pavements.
Thank you, Stephen, for that question. It certainly is an issue and has been brought to my attention. Unfortunately, I think people seem to be unable to follow simple highway code. And if you are unable to follow the highway code, this is what happens. I have asked wardens to take a look into this. We have got a zero tolerance approach to it because I know this has happened in many other parts of the borough. And of course, what we do is we send our wardens there regularly, perhaps for a week or two, and then the wardens go back there slowly, maybe once every other once a day, one day a week, every other week. It's an issue that's there across the borough and across London. We can defeat this by keep on reporting it, and our wardens will keep going out there. And because we have got a zero tolerance approach to it, and we have been very successful where we've targeted this in certain parts of the ward, issued lots of fines. And of course, residents then realise that there is a highway code and there is a reason, because certainly prams, buggies, people with impaired vision, everybody can then use the pavements, and that's what we want it to be for. And please, Stephen, if you see this regularly, keep on reporting it. We're on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second question is, what have the police and the council done to prevent burglaries in Redbridge?
Thank you. We've certainly worked very closely with the police, because ultimately the police have the powers, and certainly what we've done is shared all our intelligence with them. But we've worked together in a number of ways, because our enforcement officers are on patrol across the borough. Our enforcement officers are on patrol a lot of the time jointly tasked with the police. We've invested heavily in automatic number plate recognition cameras, and certainly our own existing CCTV has been upgraded to contain the latest cameras. And of course, we've rolled out LED lights as well to make sure that it's actually lit up a lot more in the evening, so there are less places for these burglars to lurk. But of course, what we've done is ensured we kept up to speed with the police, because ultimately it's the police who are going to be able to arrest the criminals. And by working together, I think we're certainly trying to do a lot more, as I said earlier, punch above our weight, and the numbers are increasing. Our enforcement officers, like I said, are three times more now than what we had at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, a resident would like to know exactly what do enforcement officers do, and can they actually arrest people?
Okay, now, as I've mentioned about 3 times already, enforcement officers are jointly tasked a lot of the times with the police. We've got a town centre force where the police force are there at hand. What our enforcement officer can do, they can issue fixed penalty notices, FPNs, or even PCNs, penalty charge notices. They can issue statutory notices, seizure of property, escalation to prosecution, and certainly give out warning letters and take informal action. The biggest thing I think they do is that the visible presence is a very reassuring sight for our residents. That certainly, whether it's the police or the enforcement officers, there is somebody that they can turn to in their hour of need. And there's a lot there they can do. And certainly in terms of arrest on their own, they can't, but that's why we got them jointly tasked with the police. Sometimes it just needs one police officer and our enforcement officers can go in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's the end of the live Q&A questions. If I can just hand over back to you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, as Kaylee said, that's all we have time for. I certainly want to take express my thanks to Stephen for joining us today, taking his time out to explain some of the issues, certainly clarify residents' concerns. And of course, I want to extend the thanks to the police, who I think do a tremendous job under very difficult circumstances. And I, of course, want to thank Kaylee to really host this meeting and keep us all in check. Thank you, Kaylee. And thank you to everyone who submitted their questions. And please carry on submitting your questions. Do write to me. I think I can speak for Stephen when I say it's really, really important for us to hear from you. And all your feedback really does inform what we do locally. And we want to learn more from you, because I think it's together, certainly in close engagement, close consultation, we can become a better society, and we can certainly solve a lot of the problems that we have. I hope you found this meeting useful. We will be uploading it online for anyone who may have missed it. And all I would say in conclusion is please, please, please stay safe out there. There's still the virus, and of course, there is still burglars lurking. Please have a safe night. Good night.